John Adams, one of the key architects of American independence, was absolutely terrified of being forgotten. He had this deep-seated fear that history would just boil down the messy, complicated, chaotic birth of the nation into a simple, clean story, a story starring Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, leaving him totally in the shadows. And for a long, long time, you know what? He was kind of right. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to pull John Adams right out of those shadows. We'll see how he wasn't just a brilliant lawyer and America's second president. I mean, the guy was also vain, super stubborn, and yeah, deeply insecure. And it's that mix, that complex combination of traits, that makes him one of the most fascinating figures of the entire founding generation. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at his rise as the intellectual powerhouse of the revolution, then his fall during a really controversial presidency, and finally, his remarkable reconciliation with a lifelong rival. All right, let's dive right into his rise. See, long before he was president, Adams was a Massachusetts lawyer who built a reputation for being, well, fiercely principled, especially when it wasn't the popular thing to do. And that core belief was about to face the ultimate test. So at the very heart of everything Adams believed in was this idea, the right to counsel. It's a principle that we pretty much take for granted now, right? But back then in Boston in 1770, a city just seething with anti-British rage, standing up for that principle was a seriously radical, even dangerous move. After the Boston Massacre, when British soldiers fired on civilians, literally no lawyer in the city would touch their case. No one, that is, except John Adams. He took it. He risked his reputation, probably his life, because he believed the law had to be more important than the passions of the mob. His argument that facts are stubborn things was so powerful it actually won an acquittal for most of the soldiers. This showed everybody exactly who John Adams was, a man who simply would not bend. And you better believe that reputation for being unbendable followed him right to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. While a lot of other guys were giving these big, soaring speeches, Adams was the one with his sleeves rolled up, doing the actual work. He was the engine of the revolution, the guy doing the grueling, thankless job of trying to convince a roomful of divided men to unite against the most powerful empire on Earth. Get a load of this number, 90. That is how many committees John Adams served on in Congress, an absolutely unmatched workload. Think about that. He was basically a one-man War Department, driving the whole logistical and intellectual machine for independence. So you know how we think of Thomas Jefferson as the poet of the Declaration of Independence? Well, John Adams was its bulldog. Even Jefferson, who would become his greatest rival, had to admit that Adams was the pillar of its support, relentlessly defending it on the floor of Congress. Seriously, without Adams fighting for it tooth and nail, the whole thing might have just fizzled out. Okay, so after that incredible rise comes the fall. And it was a tough one. His single term as president was, let's just say, not a victory lap. He inherited a nation that was on the brink of total chaos, caught between the superpowers of Britain and France, and just being torn apart that political fights at home. Really, his whole presidency pretty much came down to a single massive question. France, our old ally, was now attacking and seizing American merchant ships on the high seas. The pressure, especially from his own Federalist Party, to just declare war was absolutely immense. Adams had to make a choice. So he did the sensible thing first. He tried diplomacy. But wow, did it blow up in his face. It turned into this huge scandal we now call the XYZ Affair, where French agents basically demanded enormous bribes just to even start talking. When the American diplomats refused and the story got out, the entire country just exploded with outrage. The calls for war went from loud to deafening. And it's in this climate, this fever pitch of fear and anger, that his party in Congress passes the Alien and Sedition Acts. These were a set of laws that gave the government sweeping new powers to deport immigrants and, this is the most controversial part, to actually imprison anyone who criticized the government. Now, Adams didn't write them, but he did sign them into law. And that decision, well, it's been a huge stain on his legacy ever since. And man, this just ripped the country in two. On one side, you had the Federalists, who argued these acts were totally necessary to protect national security in a time of crisis. But for Jefferson's Republicans, this was pure tyranny, a blatant, unconstitutional attack on free speech, designed for one reason, to silence political opposition. This whole fight really set the stage for a debate that, let's be honest, we're still having today. Where's the line between national security and personal liberty? But here's the kicker, the real irony of it all. Despite the war fever, despite those harsh laws passed in his name, Adams never, ever gave up on peace. He went completely against the leaders of his own party, guys like Alexander Hamilton, and sent another peace mission to France. And this time, it worked. He avoided a devastating war, but in doing so, he split his party right down the middle and absolutely guaranteed he would lose the election of 1800. He chose country over party, and it cost him everything.
So, defeated and pretty bitter about the whole thing, Adams just retires to his farm in Massachusetts. But this last part of his life, wow. It gives us one of the most incredible and moving stories in all of American history. His reconciliation with the man who was his friend, then his enemy, Thomas Jefferson.
I mean, these two guys could not have been more different. You had Adams, the Federalist, who believed in a strong central government to keep order. And then you had Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, who championed states' rights and dreamed of a nation of farmers. These two completely different visions for what America should be, well, that's what fueled their legendary rivalry. Their relationship, though, what a journey. They started as allies in 1776, became bitter rivals by 1800, and then silence for 12 long years. But finally, in 1812, they started writing to each other again, hashing out all their old arguments and reflecting on the nation they'd built. And the way their story ends, I mean, you couldn't make this up. It's a twist of fate so perfect it feels like it came straight out of a movie. Both men died on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. As he was lying on his deathbed, Adams's very last words were a nod to his old friend and rival. Thomas Jefferson survives. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Jefferson had actually died just a few hours earlier down in Virginia. Just unbelievable. It was such a poignant, bittersweet end to their intertwined lives. So when you boil it all down, what's the legacy of John Adams? Well, he was the guy who stood for the rule of law no matter how unpopular. He's called the father of the American Navy. He single-handedly kept the young U.S. out of a major war it couldn't have survived. And here's something really important that sets him and his son apart from so many of the other founders: he never owned slaves.
Which really brings us right back to the man himself. Adams once wrote, "Thanks to God that he gave me stubbornness when I know I am right." That very same stubbornness is what made him defend those soldiers and fight for independence. It's also what made him so politically isolated and cost him a second term. So it all comes down to this one big question about his character. Was that stubbornness his greatest flaw or his greatest virtue?